This is video 8.3 using intercepts. In this video we're going to learn about the x and the y intercept. Now to start, the x-intercept is the x-coordinate, alright, that's the x-coordinate of a point where the graph crosses the x-axis. Well, right here is our x-axis. Here's where our line crosses the x-axis, and we're looking for what the x-coordinate is. If you look here, the x-coordinate is a 3. So that means that the x-intercept for this particular line is 3. Now what's the y-coordinate for this point here that happens on the x-axis? Well, it has to be 0 because it's crossing the x-axis. In any point where a line crosses the x-axis is going to have a coordinate, y-coordinate of 0. So we're going to put this as 0. It's always going to be true. X can be any point along this line where the line crosses across this axis. Alright, now let's find the y-intercept. That's the y-coordinate. So now we're looking for y of a point where the graph crosses the y-axis. Alright, that happens right here. Okay, so what is this point? Well, it's on the y-axis, so x has to be 0. So now we know that x is always going to have to be 0 for it to cross the y-axis. And the y-coordinate is a 3. So that means the y-intercept for this particular line is 3. Now let's say I'm starting with an equation for a line. So let's say I have 2x minus 3y equals negative 12. And I'm looking for the x and the y-intercept. And then I'm going to graph it using the x and the y-intercept. So, how am I going to find the x and y-intercept? Well, I know that the x-intercept, so this is my x-intercept. We don't know what x is, but we know that y has to be 0. And to find the y-intercept, we know that x has to be 0, and we're going to look for y. So I can plug this into my equation here. So I'm going to start by trying to find the x-intercept. Alright, so I'm going to take 2x minus 3, I'm going to substitute 0 for y, equals 12. And now I just need to solve for x, and that'll tell me what's going to go in this point here on my line. Right? So 2x, well, this becomes 0, equals 12. So this cancels out. Now I need to just divide both sides by 2. The transformation principle lets me do this for division. 2's cancel out, and x equals 6. So I know that point on my line where it's going to cross the x-axis is at 6. So there it is right there. This is point 6, 0. So that would be called my x-intercept. Right, now let's find our y-intercept. We're going to take this original equation again. And this time we're going to substitute 0 for x. So 2 times 0 minus 3y equals 12. Well, 2 times 0 is 0, so now I end up with, if I DPS this, a negative 3y equals 12. I need to divide both sides by negative 3. And I end up with y equals, now if you do this division, you've got one negative and one positive, so it's going to be negative 4. So my y-intercept is going to be negative 4. Okay, now let's graph this line. We know our x-intercept. We've got that here. Now let's mark our y-intercept. All right, it's going to be 0 on the x-axis, and then we've got a -4 right here. All right, now I just need to make my line. Okay, so this represents this equation's line. I've identified my x-intercept and my y-intercept. Right, let's look at the next problem. Now here, I want to identify my x and y intercepts. Well, I know my x-intercept is here because it's where it crosses the x-axis. So I need to just decide what that point is. Well, it crosses it at 4, 0. So my x-intercept is 4. So now my y-intercept is here, and that's the coordinates 0, 3. So my y-intercept would be 3. So if I were to write this out, I'd have a y-intercept of 3 and an x-intercept of 4. Right. Find the intercepts of the equation's graph, then graph the equation. To find the x-intercept of a line, substitute 0 for y in the line's equation and solve for x. This is what we did up here, where we substituted the 0. To find a y-intercept of a line, substitute 0 for x in the line's equation and solve for y. So now here's another example that we can solve and graph. All right? So let's make our little xy table. And we're going to find two different points. One point where x is 0 and one point where y is 0. Okay, this one here is going to give us our y-intercept. And this one here is going to give us our x-intercept. Right? And right here is the equation we're going to use. All right, so for the first part, let's say we're going to substitute 0 for x. So we get the opposite of 0 plus 3y equals -9. Well, this just goes away. So we get 3y equals -9. Now I'm going to use the transformation principle of division for equality to remove the 3. And I get y equals, now notice you have a negative and a positive here, so my answer is going to be negative. So y is -3. So that means that my y-intercept is -3. So if I were to graph that, that would fall right here, because my point is 0, -3. Right, now let's do it again, but using 0 for y to find our x-intercept. So we're going to use the equation here again. We've got the opposite of x plus 3 times 0 equals -9. Right? 3 times 0 is 0, so I get the opposite of x equals -9. Well, I don't want the opposite of x. I want to know what x is. So I can either divide by -1 or multiply by -1 to undo this. And I get x equals 9. So now I know that my x-intercept is 9. I have a point here which I can graph, which is right here. And I could draw my line. And now I've graphed this equation's line using the x and the y-intercept. Now let's do one last example. Right, here's another equation, and I'm looking for my x and y-intercept, and then I'm going to graph it. So I know that one of them is 0 for x, so this would be my y-intercept. So I'm going to start with that one. So I'm going to take my equation, negative 1/3, I'm going to substitute 0 for x, plus 7/6 y equals negative 7/3. Okay, now I'm just going to solve this I'm going to cancel this out because it's times 0, so I'm left with 7/6 y equals negative 7/3. Now I want to undo this 7/6, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 6/7 by the reciprocal. Okay, these cancel out, and I'm left with y. Over here I've got 7 and 7, so I'm left with negative 1 on top here. Negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. 3 times 1 is 3. Right, I can simplify this. I have a negative and a positive, so my answer has to be negative. So y equals negative 2. So now I know that my y-intercept is negative 2, and I can graph it right here. It's where my point crosses the y-axis, or my line crosses the y-axis, so that point's going to be right there. Alright, now let's find our x-intercept. So to find my x-intercept, I need y to be 0. So I'm going to take my equation again, negative 1/3 x plus 7/6 times 0 equals negative 7/3. Okay, again, this is times 0, so I'm left with negative 1/3 x equals negative 7/3. I'm going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal, so times negative 3/1 times negative 3/1. Right, these cancel out. I'm left with x equals, right, this becomes 1, this becomes negative 1. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive, so I'm left with x equals 7. So I know that my x-intercept ends up being 7. So let's graph that right here. And now let's make our line. So I have my x-intercept and my y-intercept, and I've graphed the line for this equation using the x and y-intercept. Now it's your turn to try these problems, so there's a set of problems here for you to try in your video handout. And this is the end of the video on using intercepts.